When you live this far out, you count on people. You have to. Stone's End, Alaska, isn't the kind of place you just visit. There's no road in or out, no cell service, no convenience store an hour down the highway. We have a ferry for the summer months, a float plane, maybe once a week if the weather behaves. And in winter, you either ride a snowmobile or a dog sled. That's it. The forest feeds us. The ocean keeps us alive. And between the two, the mountains keep us penned in like sheep in a frozen corral. Out here, folks don't lock their doors. Not because we're trusting, but because if someone needs help, they need it now, and no lock should slow them down. You see your neighbors almost every day. You share your tools, your fish, your firewood. You remember the smell of someone's coffee when you stop by, or the sound of their laugh when they've had one too many drinks. That's why it was so strange when Eli Kennard went missing. Eli was one of the best hunters we had, mid-50s, wiry but strong, the kind of man who could disappear into the trees for a week and come back with enough meat to feed the whole village. He knew every ridge, every gully, every animal trail. If there was a man in Stone's End who wouldn't get lost, it was Eli. One morning, he didn't come back from checking his trap lines. His snowmobile was gone from the shed, his rifle missing from the rack. His wife waited until sunset, then came to my office, pale as frost. I called my deputy, Sarah Lowe, and within an hour, we had half the able-bodied men and women in town ready to search. The first day, we followed his trap lines until the light started to go. The next day, we spread out wider, searching ridges where the snow lay deep and silent. By the third day, the weather turned, wind driving snow so hard you could barely see the tree line. I called the search off. When you live out here, you know what 3 days in the bush without food or shelter means. The next morning, Eli walked into the diner. He was grinning, healthy, not a frostbite mark on him. His parka was zipped neat, boots spotless. I'd seen men come out of the forest after just one night, beards iced over, clothes stiff, eyes sunken. But Eli, he looked like he'd been in a warm cabin the whole time. He said he'd been tracking a bull moose that kept moving deeper into the bush, got turned around, lost track of time. Folks laughed, clapped him on the back. Relief was a warm thing in the diner that morning, but I noticed things others didn't. He didn't blink enough. His handshake was too light, like he was mimicking the motion. His eyes didn't match his mouth when he smiled. Later, Sarah leaned toward me and whispered, 3 days, Jack. No food, no firewood. Those boots are cleaner than mine. I just nodded. I noticed. I tried to push it out of my mind. People change after a scare. Maybe he was just shaken up. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Then it happened again. 2 brothers, this time. Tom and Randy Walsh, both born and raised in Stone's End. Sons of a fisherman, grandsons of a trapper. You couldn't ask for steadier men. Tom was the older by 2 years, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. Randy was quicker with a joke, quicker to take a risk, but he had hands like a vice and could run a saw all day without complaint. Between the 2 of them, they'd been part of every logging crew in the village for over a decade. If there was a problem in the bush, they were the ones you sent. That winter, the crews were working a stand of old-growth spruce 5 miles past Eli's trap line. Hard, cold work. Chainsaws whining through the still air, snow tamped down into icy tracks where the sleds hauled the cut timber back toward the mill. The Walsh brothers had been assigned the far end of the stand, where the trees grew thick and the wind barely touched the ground. They left before sunrise one morning, as they always did. By late afternoon, their sleds came rumbling back into camp. Empty. Just sitting there at the edge of the clearing like they'd been parked in a hurry. No brothers, no tracks leading away. The foreman called me, and by nightfall I was at the camp with Sarah. The other loggers stood in a half circle, their breath hanging in the air, eyes darting toward the dark tree line. No one liked to work that far out, but everyone knew the Walsh brothers could handle it. That was the problem. if they hadn't made it back, something was wrong. We agreed to gather a search party at first light. Half the camp was ready to volunteer, men we'd pulled from their own dinner tables back in town, women with snowshoes strapped to their boots and flashlights in their packs. In Stone's End, you look after your own. We were just finishing loading the sleds when the sound of engines came from the north road. 2 snowmobiles appeared between the trees. Tom and Randy. They rolled into camp like nothing was wrong, parked their sleds side by side, swung off in unison. The clothes were spotless, no sawdust in their hair, no ice clinging to their beards. "Got turned around," Tom said. His voice was flat, calm, like he was reading a weather report. "We're fine." Randy added, "Snow came down heavy out there. We just waited it out." No one said anything for a moment. You could feel the relief and something else washing over the camp. I stepped forward. "You didn't hear us, out looking, calling your names?" Both brothers looked at me, not just looked, locked their eyes on mine and held it a beat too long. "No," Tom said. "Didn't hear a thing." Then, without another word, they walked away together, shoulders nearly touching, steps perfectly matched. For a little while after the Walsh brothers came back, life in Stone's End seemed to settle again. A week passed, then another. No one went missing. No late-night search parties. The logging crews kept working. Fishermen kept hauling in their catches through the ice. You could almost believe things were back to normal. Almost. Eli and the Walsh brothers still moved through town like clockwork, never apart from each other for long, their boots always spotless, their voices always calm, too calm. People noticed. They didn't say much at first, not in the open anyway, but I'd catch the looks, the sideways glances when Eli walked past the diner window, the way conversations slowed when the Walsh brothers stepped into the store. Then the whispers started again. A woman stopped me outside the post office one morning, her scarf pulled high against the wind. She leaned in close. "Tom doesn't laugh anymore," she said. "You ever notice? Used to be, he'd laugh so hard it'd shake the walls. Now he just smiles." Later that same day, I was in the general store when old man Keller told me about Dan Haskins down at the docks. "His wife said something to him at dinner yesterday," Keller muttered, "and he just stared at her, didn't say a word, like he didn't know what words to use." I made a note to stop by the docks the next morning, but before I could, I saw them, Dan and his wife walking down Main Street together, holding hands, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. When I passed them and said hello, they both looked at me at exactly the same time, and for just a moment, their smiles didn't seem real. It wasn't just them. 2 kids told Sarah that Mrs. Hendricks down on the East Road had been standing in her yard for hours, staring at the forest, even while the snow piled on her shoulders. Someone else said they'd seen Eddie Marshall in the middle of the night, walking down the frozen shoreline barefoot. Every story was small, easy to dismiss on its own. A bit odd, sure, but not enough to act on. But I kept hearing them, over and over. The list in my desk drawer started to grow again, slowly, quietly. It was a Saturday night when I decided to stop by the bar. Stone's End might be small, but Saturday night was always busy there. Music spilling into the street, the smell of beer before you even touched the door handle. That night, the door was locked. No music, no laughter. Just silence behind drawn curtains. They never closed on Saturday night. Not here. Not ever. The next morning I went to church. Normally you'd barely find a seat. This time, the pews were nearly empty. Only the pastor and a handful of people, all wearing the same uneasy expression. There was no sermon. Instead, they came to me. A man said he'd seen people heading toward the woods in the middle of the night, folks who never used to talk to each other, now walking together like old friends. A woman whispered she'd woken at 1 a.m. to see a couple strolling down Main Street arm in arm. The man carried a shopping bag. The woman laughed softly, but it was the middle of the night, and every shop was closed. Another told me 3 men had stood in the snow outside her house for nearly an hour, all facing the same direction, their heads tilted at the same strange angle. By the time they were done, my notebook was half full, and every story ended the same way. They were always heading toward the forest. It was later that week when Sarah disappeared. She'd taken the snowmobile up toward the old logging road, said she wanted to check on one of the outer cabins before dark. The radio crackled once, then nothing. The next morning, the door to the office opened, and there she was, uniform pressed, hair perfect, smile wide and calm. "Sorry, boss," she said. "Guess I got turned around." The words felt rehearsed, wrong. After that, I knew we couldn't keep going like this. I gathered the last dozen people I was sure were still themselves. We took what supplies we could carry and holed up in the school gym. At first, it felt like safety. We set up cots along the wall. We took turns standing watch at the doors. We kept the heaters running and rationed food, telling ourselves we'd hold out until help came. But the days passed, and no one came. The hum from the woods got louder. Some nights it was just a vibration under the floorboards, low enough to make your teeth ache. Other nights it swelled until the windows trembled in their frames. By the 5th day, people had stopped sleeping. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find someone sitting on their cot staring at the door like they were waiting for something. By the 7th day, the air felt heavier. The food tasted wrong. We started to hear faint tapping on the walls, slow, deliberate, like knuckles brushing the siding. Then the first one snuck out. It was Martin, a fisherman. We woke up and his cot was empty, his blanket folded neatly. The next morning I saw him, standing in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by changed ones. His head turned slowly, eyes scanning the windows until they found me. And when they did, he smiled. A day later it was Anna, then George. Each time they'd disappear in the night and I'd spot them the next day, maybe across the street standing in the window of the hardware store, just watching. Or in the crowd gathered outside the gym, their faces blank, their breath fogging the glass. By the 2nd week, we were down to 4. When Ellen left, I didn't even try to stop her. She just stood up in the middle of the night, walked to the door, and opened it. The cold rolled in. She didn't look back. The next day, I saw her standing beside Sarah in front of the diner, both of them tilting their heads at the exact same angle. By the end of the 3rd week, I was alone. The gym was silent except for the faint ticking of the heater. The cots stood in a neat row against the wall, each one empty. Some still had blankets draped over them, others bare. I'd stopped counting the hours since Ellen left. Outside, the snow had drifted halfway up the gym's double doors. It muffled the sound, deadened the world, made the silence inside feel heavier. I stood at the window looking out over Main Street. They were there, the changed ones, dozens of them, standing in the snow like fence posts, not close enough to touch the building, but close enough to see every face. Their eyes tracked me when I moved from one window to another. I recognized every one of them. Friends, neighbors, people I'd shared drinks with, hauled nets beside, fixed roofs for, all of them standing without a shiver, without a blink, their breath fogging in perfect unison. I stayed in the gym for another night, but it felt pointless. The walls weren't keeping anything out, not really. I could feel them, even when I couldn't see them. The next morning I stepped outside. The air was sharp enough to sting my throat. The crowd didn't move as I walked past. They simply turned their heads, following me like the slow swing of a weather vane. I passed the diner and saw more of them inside, seated at the counter, hands resting neatly on the laminate. They stared at the empty plates before them as if waiting to be served. None spoke. I walked further and found others in the hardware store, the general store, the post office. Each place was the same, standing or sitting, unmoving, as if they were holding a place for someone who was late. It wasn't until I turned onto the road that led to the docks that I heard them speaking. Not all at once, but here and there, voices slipping into the frozen air like steam from a kettle. "Ferry will come in, early summer, maybe June. Plenty of room for more by then. We'll need to be ready, need to spread further inland." The words were casual, like neighbors discussing the weather or the next fishing trip. But there was nothing casual in the way they said "we." More voices joined in as I passed. They didn't speak to me, I wasn't part of the conversation, but they didn't whisper either. They wanted me to hear. "Some will come by a plane, some will come by a boat. All will stay." I realized then that it wasn't about Stone's End anymore. We were just the start. By the time I reached the far end of town, the sky had gone the dull, colorless gray that comes before heavy snow. I could feel the hum now, not in my ears but in my bones, a low, steady vibration pulling me north. Sarah was waiting for me at the tree line. Her parka was zipped, her hands in her pockets, and she smiled like this was any other morning. "It's easier than you think," she said. "You'll see." The trees beyond her swayed without wind. Shadows shifted in the gaps between trunks, long and fluid, stretching toward me like they knew my name. I looked back at Main Street one last time. They were all watching. Every face turned toward me, every head tilted just so, like 100 mirrors reflecting the same expression. And behind them, through the shop windows and frosted glass, more faces stared from the shadows, waiting. I stepped forward. The cold deepened. The hum grew louder, filling the space where my thoughts should be. Sarah fell into step beside me as we crossed into the trees. The snow underfoot was soft, untouched, but there were shapes beneath it, depressions like footprints, though longer, wider. The forest closed around us, and somewhere ahead, beyond the white silence, I could hear them speaking again, voices like a chorus carried on the wind. Planning, welcoming, expanding. The hum swells, shaking the air. Days later, I walked back into Stone's End. My uniform was immaculate, my smile calm. "Morning," I said as I stepped into the diner. My eyes didn't blink. Outside, the forest swayed without wind. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. Stories like this are best shared, so if it sent a chill down your spine, let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think really happened in Stone's End, and what's waiting in those woods. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like. It helps more than you know. And if you want more original horror tales of isolation, dread, and the things that don't let go, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next story, if you make it back.